Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we actually finally have some good news from the Russia and Ukraine war situation that's been unfolding. We haven't really done an update here on the channel in a couple of weeks. There hasn't really been anything that I've found like worthy of talking about. I know that there's been updates and new situations and stuff, but nothing really that I've felt like I personally wanted to cover. But today's update is actually a somewhat positive one compared to a lot of the news that we've been hearing recently and everything about the war. Obviously, with it being a war, most if not the vast majority of all the news that we're gonna get is pretty negative. I mean, obviously people die, people are losing their homes, like this is a tragic and terrible situation and everything, and we've been covering it pretty much since it unfolded here on the channel, but we've never really had like a positive development in this entire thing. You know, it's always just been about people dying and unfortunate tragedies and everything that's been unfolding. But we actually have some good news finally. So one of the big things that's been happening, at least in the last like few weeks, right, in this war, is there's been like the increased talks of like the use of nuclear weapons. So there's been a lot of headlines and articles and talks about the potential for like Russia to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine, even if they're smaller tactical nuclear weapons. The idea that Russia would do something like that and use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, it's been floated around. It's been floated by, you know, Russian officials on Russian state TV. It's been something that like American officials and Ukrainian officials have addressed. It's been all over the news, right? We've been hearing about it, and it's a scary concept, right? It's a scary thought to think that Russia could actually use nuclear weapons in conflict like this and everything, but we finally have a positive development on this because it appears that Russia is actually finally starting to walk back their threats of using nuclear weapons. So the source for today's video is the Institute for the Study of War. They have an interactive map on the Russian invasion of Ukraine that you can use to get real-time updates on the war situation. I've used it to source a lot of my videos. They source all of the things that they end up reporting on and everything as well. It's a very solid source in my opinion, and according to their coverage, it looks like the Kremlin is starting to kind of de-escalate that nuclear rhetoric a little bit, and they're kind of walking those threats back. It appears that they kind of had a little bit of a motive behind this that didn't really work out for them, and it looks like they kind of realized that a little bit, and now they're just kind of walking it back, because obviously the use of nuclear weapons like that goes beyond and above, you know, just invading a country and doing like the regular war thing, right? That could literally lead to the extinction of humanity, because like if one country uses nuclear weapons, there's no guarantee that another country won't nuke them, and so on and so forth, right? Like it could genuinely be a major catastrophic event for humanity. It's a scary thought, you know, but it appears that Russia is finally starting to kind of realize that like threatening to use nuclear weapons isn't necessarily the way to go. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the MFA, released a statement on the prevention of nuclear war on November 2nd, stating that Russia is, quote, strictly and consistently guided by the postulate of the inadmissibility of a nuclear war in which there can be no winners and which must never be unleashed. The Russian MFA also stated it's committed to the reduction and limitation of nuclear weapons. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated on October 27th that Russia has no need to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine, and claimed that Russia has never discussed the possibility of using nuclear weapons, only, quote, hinting at the statements made by the leaders of Western countries. The deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, has similarly increasingly downplayed the fiery nuclear rhetoric he used throughout October, and is now focused on promoting Russian unity in the war in Ukraine. So it appears that the big shots, I guess, in the Russian government are kind of walking back that idea of Russia using nuclear weapons. Not only is Putin speaking out saying like, hey, Russia's not going to use nukes, but other people in government are too. The Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and also at the same time, the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council. So people with actual figurative power in the country of Russia are finally speaking out and saying like, hey, this isn't going to happen, because this was a major concern. It was a major worry for the West, right? Like, are they going to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine? If so, what does the West do in retaliation or response? There was a lot of different options on the table. The US was committed to helping Ukraine through the situation, of course, and it was just a scary thought, you know, as a civilian, to think of the millions of people in Ukraine, you know, trying to live their normal daily lives, right, and already being affected so much by this war. The idea that they could be nuclearly obliterated, right, it's a terrifying thought, because if it can happen to them, it could really happen to anybody, right? And the idea of people going through that kind of suffering is just terrible. So hopefully this isn't something that just just happens once and then gets stopped, right? Hopefully Russia continues to de-escalate what they're doing and kind of walking back some of those ridiculous threats that they've been making over the past few weeks/months. Now, why is Russia walking this entire situation back? Well, there's a pretty simple answer to that. So, the New York Times, citing senior US officials, reported that senior Russian defense officials discussed the conditions for nuclear use against the backdrop of growing nuclear narratives in mid-October. The meeting reportedly did not involve Putin. Putin's illegal September 30th annexation of 4 Ukrainian oblasts, much of which Russian forces do not occupy, likely overcomplicated existing Russian military doctrine. Russian nuclear doctrine clearly allows for nuclear weapons use in response to, quote, aggression against the Russian Federation, with the use of conventional weapons when the very existence of the state is in jeopardy, which the Kremlin could conceivably apply to Ukrainian advances into claimed, quote, Russian territory in Ukraine. All of the current front lines fall within claimed Russian territory, and Putin has not publicly defined what now constitutes as an attack on Russian territory. It is possible that senior Russian military officials are equally confused about the application of Putin's annexation order into existing military doctrine. ISW previously reported that Putin's annexation order was likely a polarizing issue that ignited a fracture within the Kremlin, creating pro-war and pro-negotiations factions. US officials also noted that they have not observed any indicators that Russia has moved its nuclear weapons or undertaken any preparatory steps to prepare for a strike. So in layman's terms, Russia isn't moving their nuclear weapons. They're not making any immediate moves that leads the West to believe that they're going to imminently target and use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, which is really good and relieving news. I mean, it would be very terrifying if, like, we got on here and we read, like, hey, the Russians are moving their nukes, they're preparing them to launch. At that point, you know, like, these things can be figured out. We have satellite technology and radars and all kinds of different things that are always constantly 24/7 being used by intelligence officials to kind of gauge and determine what countries are doing. In fact, a lot of this kind of like operational ability by the United States and its allies was part of the reason that we knew beforehand that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. We saw the force build up on the border, we saw all the troop movements, we saw the equipment movements, and we pretty much knew that Ukraine was going to get invaded before it did. I mean, if you remember, even weeks before the actual invasion, people were calling out that the invasion was going to happen and everything. Like, we already knew that this was coming, but we would obviously know as well if there was any sort of nuclear threat, if the Russians were moving their nuclear weapons. These kinds of things are pretty knowledgeable for, like, the US. So it's just a little bit of good news, man. You know, I feel like with this war and everything, covering it, it's a very negative, very sad topic, right? And I just wanted to provide at least a little bit of a positive update in this entire thing, because if we're going to cover the idea of Russia using nuclear weapons and it's going to work people up, I feel like we should also cover when they're de-escalating and when it's becoming less likely that nuclear conflict is on the table, right? Because I don't want people to worry. I don't want you guys to come on the channel and see these videos and be like, oh shit, you know. I want to be informative. I want to, you know, give you guys actual, like, critical, objectively true information and stuff as often as I can. And this is just part of that, man. So just a positive update in general. So hopefully this continues and there is no nuclear threat from Russia in terms of Ukraine. Hopefully that's kind of something that's out the window now, right? So with that being said, though, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel, follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubToOptimus. Make sure to check out Shoptimus down below. Thank you to my Watch Optimus members. Your support helps my channel tremendously. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, well, talking about some good news for once, and signing out.